Rebel and the Raj. The Revolt of 1857 and its representations. Late in the afternoon of 10 May 1857, the Sepoys in the cantonment of Meerut broke out the mutiny. It began in the line of the native infantry, spread very swiftly to the cavalry, and then tried to city. The ordinary peoples of the town and surrounding villages joined the Sipahi. जो घुड़सवार होते हैं उसने कैवलरी बोलते हैं. Joined the Sipahis. The Sipahis captured the bell of arms where the arms and ammunition were kept and proceeded to attack white peoples and to ransack and burn their bungalows and properties, government buildings and the record office, jail, court, post office, treasury, etc. were destroyed and plundered. The telegraph line to Delhi court was cut. As darkness descended, a group of Sipahis rode off towards Delhi. The Sipahi arrives at gate of the Red Fort nearly in the morning on 11 May. It was the morning of Ramzan, the Muslim holy month of prayer and fasting. The old Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah had just finished his prayers and meal before the sun rose and the fast began. He heard the commotion at the gates. The Sipahis who had gathered under his widow told him, "We have come from Meerut after killing all the Englishmen there because they asked us to bite bullets that were coated with the fats of cows and pigs with our teeth. This has corrupted the faith of Hindus and Muslims alike." The another group of Sipahi also entered Delhi and the ordinary people of the city joined them. Europeans were killed in large number. The rich of Delhi were attacked and looted. It was clearly that the Delhi has gone out of British control. Some Sipahis rode into the Red Fort without observing the elaborate court etiquettes expected of them. They demand that the emperor gave them his blessing, surrounded by the Sipahis. Bahadur Shah had no other opinion but to comply. The revolt this acquired a kind of legitimacy because it could now be carried on in the name of Mughal emperor. This is portrait of Bahadur Shah Jafar. Through 20 and 13 May, North India remained quiet. Once word spread that Delhi had fallen to the rebels and Bahadur Shah had blessed the rebellions. Event now swiftly cantonment. After the cantonment in the Gangetic Valley, some to the west of Delhi rose in mutiny, a pattern of the rebellion. If one were to place the dates of these mutinies in the chronological order, it would appear that as the news of the mutiny in one town traveled to the next, the Sipahis there took up arms and the sequence of events in every cantonment followed in similar pattern. Bell of arms in a storeroom in which weapons are kept. How बेल आर्म्स किसे कहते हैं जो जिस स्टोर रूम में वेपन्स रखे जाते हैं उन्हें बेल ऑफ आर्म्स कहते हैं. हाउ द म्यूटिनी बिगिन. द सिपाही बिगेन देयर एक्शन विद अ सिग्नल. In the many places it was the firing of the evening gun or the sounding of the bugle. They first seized the bell of arms and plundered the treasury. They then attacked government buildings, the jail, treasury, telegraph office, record room, bungalows, burning all records. Everything and everybody connected with the white men became a target. Proclaims in Hindi, Urdu and Persian were put up in the cities calling upon the population, both Hindus and Muslims, to unite, raise, exterminate the Firangis. When the ordinary people began joining the revolt, the targets of the people varied. In major towns like Lucknow, Kanpur and Bareilly, money lenders and the rich also became the objects of rebel wrath. Pleasants not only saw them as oppressors but only as allies of the British. In most places their houses were looted and destroyed. The mutiny in the Sipahi ranks quickly became a rebellion. There was a general defiance of all kind of immunity and hierarchy. In the month of May and June, the British has no answer to the action of rebels. Individual Britons tried to save their own lives and the lives of their families. British rule, as one British officer noted, collapsed like a house made of cards. Source 1: Ordinary life in extraordinary times. What happened in the city during the month of the revolt? How did people live through this month of tumult? How was the normal life affected? Reports from the different cities tell us about the breakdown in routine activities. Read these reports from the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, 14 May 1957. The same thing is true for vegetables and sag speeches. People have been found to complain that even kaddu, pumpkin, and bagan, brinjal could be found in the bazaars. Potatoes, arvi, yam, when available, are of stale and rotten variety stored from before or by Farsitan. Kunjaras, vegetable grower from the garden inside the city. Some produce does reach a few places, but the poor and the middle class can only lick their lips and watch them, as they are earmarked for the select. There is something else that need attention, which is causing a lot of damage to the peoples, which is that the water carries through stopped filling. Water carriers have stopped filling water. Poor servants genitality are seen carrying water in the pails on the shoulders, and only then the necessary household tasks such as cooking etc. can take place. The halakhors, righteous, have become the corrupts. Many mohallas have not been able to earn these several days, and if this situation continues, then decay, death, and disease will combine through together to spoil the city's air, and an epidemic will spread all over the city and even to areas adjacent and around. Lines of communication. The reason for the similarity in the pattern of the revolt in different places lay partially in the planning and the coordination. It is clear that there was communication between the Sipahi lines of various cantonments. After the 7th Avadh irregular cavalry had refused to accept the new cartilage in earlier May, they wrote to the 48th Native Infantry that they had acted for the faith and awaited the 48th order. Sipahi or their emissaries moved from one station to another. Peoples were thus planning and talking about the rebellion. Sistan and the Tehsildars. In contrast of the communication of the message of revolt and mutiny, the experience of Francisco Sistan, a native Christian police inspector in the Sitapur, is telling he had gone to Saharanpur to pay his respect to the magistrate. Siren was dressed in an Indian cloth and seated cross-legged. A Muslim Tehsildar from Bijnor entered the room. Upon learning that Sistan was from Avadh, he inquired, "What news from Avadh? How does the work progress, brother?" Playing safely, the Sistan replied, "If we have worked in Avadh, your highness will know it." The Tehsildar said, "Depend upon it, we will succeed this time. The direction of this business is able hands." The Tehsildar was later identified as the principal rebellion leader of Bijnor. The pattern of mutinies and the pieces of evidence that suggest some sort of planning and coordination raise a certain crucial question: how were the plans made? Who were the planners? It is difficult on the basis of available documents to provide direct answer to such questions, but one indicates provide clues as to how the mutinies came to be so organized. Captain Horsey of Avadh military police had been given protection by the Indian subordinates during the mutiny. The 41 native infantry, which was stationed in the same place, insisted that since they had killed all their white officers, the military police should also kill Hershey or deliver him as prisoner to the 41st. The military police refused to do either, and it was decided that the matter would be settled by a panchayat composed of the native officers drawn from each regiment. Charles Bell, who wrote one of the earliest stories of the uprising, noted that panchayats were a nightly occurrence in the Kanpur Sipahi lines. What they suggest is that some of the decisions were taken collectively, given the fact that Sipahis lived in the line or shared a common lifestyle, and the many of them came from same caste. It is not difficult to imagine them sitting together to decide their own future. The Sipahis were the makers of their own rebel. Leaders and followers. To fight the British, leader and organization were acquired. For this, the rebels sometimes turned into those who had been leaders before the British conquest. One of the first acts of the Sipahi Meerut, as we saw, was to rush to Delhi and appeal to the old Mughal emperor to accept the leadership of the revolt. This acceptance of leader took its time in coming. Bahadur Shah's first reaction was one of the horror and rejection. It was only when some Sipahis had moved into the Mughal court within the Red Fort, he defiance of normal court etiquette, that the old emperor, realizing he had very few options, agreed to the nominal leaders of the rebellion. Elsewhere, similar scenes were enacted through a minor scale in Kanpur. The Sipahi and the peoples of the town gave Nana Sahib, the successor of Peshwa Baji Rao Dutiya, no choice save to join the revolt as their leader. In Jhansi, the Rani was forced by the popular pressure around her to assume the leadership of the uprising. So was Kanpur Kunwar Singh, a local zamindar in Ara in Bihar, in Avadh, where the displacement of the popular Nawab Wajid Ali Shah and the annexation of the state were still very fresh in the memories of the people. The populace in the Lucknow celebrated the fall of British rule by hailing Brijesh Qadar, the young son of the Nawab, as their leader. Not everywhere were the leaders people of the court, Rani, Rajas, Nawabs and Tokidars. Often the message of rebellion was carried by ordinary men and women, and in the places by religious men too. From Meerut, there were reports that a fakir had appeared riding on an elephant and that the Sepoys were visiting him frequently. In Lucknow, after the annexation of Avadh, there were many religious leaders and self-studied prophets were preached and destruction of British rule. Elsewhere, local leaders emerged urging peasants, zamindars and the tribals to revolt. Shah Mal mobilized the villagers to Pargana Borut in the Uttar Pradesh. Gono, a tribe cultivator of the Singhum and Chota Nagpur, became a rebellion leader of Khol tribes of region. This is a portrait of Nana Sahib, who is adopted son of Peshwa Baji Rao Dutiya. Two rebels of 1857. Shamal. Shamal lived in a large village in Paragana Borut in Uttar Pradesh. He belonged to a clan of Jat cultivators war kingship ties extended over Chorasides, 84 villages. The land in the region were irrigated and fertile, with rich dark loam soil. Many of the villagers were prospered and saw the British land revenue system as oppressive. The revenue demand was high and its collection flexible. Consequently, cultivators were losing land to outsiders, to traders and moneylenders who were coming into the area. Shah Amal mobilized the headmen of cultivators of Chorasides, moving at the night from village to village, urging people to rebel against the British. As in many other places, the revolt against the British turned into a general rebellion against all sign of oppression and injustice. Cultivators left their fields and plundered the houses of moneylenders and traders. Displaced priorities took possession of the land they had lost. Shah Amal's men attacked government buildings, destroyed the bridge over the river, and dug up Metal's road, partly to prevent government forces from coming into the area, and partly because bridges and roads were seen as the symbol of British rule. They sent supplies to the Sepoys who had mutinied in Delhi and stopped all the official communication between British headquarters and Meerut. Locally acknowledged as Raja, Shah Amal took over the bungalow of an English officer, turned it into a hall of justice, settling disputes and dispensing judgments. He also set up amazingly effective network of intelligence. For a period, the people of the area felt that Firangi Raj was over and their Raj had come. Shah Amal killed in the battle in July 1857 Mudvi Sahmatullah Shah, Maulvi Sahmatullah Shah, Ahmadullah Shah, Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah. Maulvi Ahmadullah Shah was one of the many Maulvis who played an important part in the revolt of 1857. Educated in Hyderabad, he became a preacher when young. In 1856, he was seen moving from village to village, preaching jihad, religious war against the British and urging people to rebel. He moved in palanquin and drum beats in the front and followers at the rears. He was therefore popularly called Danka Shah. Maulvi was the drum, Danka. British officials piqued as thousands began following the Maulvi, and many Muslims began see him as the inspired prophet. When he reached Lucknow in 1856, he was stopped by police from preaching in the city. Subsequently, in the 1857, he was jailed in Faridabad. When released, he was elected as the mutinous 22 native infantry as their leader. He fought in the famous Battle of Chinhath, in which the British forces under Harry Lawrence were defeated. He came to be known for his courage and power. Many people, in fact, believed that he was invincible, had magical powers, and he could not be killed by Britishers. It was the belief that partly formed the basis of his authority. Rumors and prophecies. Rumors and prophecies played a part in moving people to action. As we saw, the Sepoys who had arrived in Delhi and Meerut had told Bahadur Shah about bullets coated with the fats of cows and pigs, that biting those bullets would corrupt their caste and religion. They were referring to the cartilages of the infilled rifles which had just been given to them. The British tried to explain to the Sepoys that this was not the case, but the rumors that the new cartilages were greased with the fat of cows and pigs spread like wildfire across the Sepoy lines of North India. This is one rumor whose origin can be traced. Captain Wright, commandant of the rifle instruction depot, reported in the third week of January 1857, a low-caste Khalasi who worked in the magazine in Dum Dum had asked a Brahmin Sipahi for a drink of water from his lota, the Sipahi has refused, saying that the lower castes touch would defile the lota. The Khalasis had reportedly retorted, "You will soon lose your caste as ere long you have a white cartilage covered with the fats of cows and pigs." We do not know the veracity of the report, but once this rumor started, no amount of assured from the British officers could stop its circulation, and the fear it spread among the Sepoys. This was not only rumors that was circulating in North India at the beginning of 1857. There was the rumor that the British government had hatched a gigantic conspiracy to destroy the caste and religion of Hindu and Muslims. To this end, the rumors said the British had mixed the bone dust of cows and pigs into the flour that was sold in the market, in towns and the cantonments. Sepoys and the common people refused to touch the atta floor. There was fear and suspicion that the British wanted to convert Indians to Christianity. Panic spread fast. British officers tried to allay their fears, but in vain. Their fears treated men to the action. The responses to the call for the action was reinforced by the prophecy that British rule would come to an end on the century of the Battle of Plassey on 23rd June 1857. Rumors were not the only thing circulating at the time. The reports came from various parts of North India. These chapatis were being distributed from village to village. A person would come at night and give a chapati to the watchman of the village and ask him to make 5 more and distribute to the next village, and so on. The meaning and purpose to the distribution of the chapatis was not clear, and it is not clear even today, but is no doubt the people read it was an omen of upheaval. Why did people believe in the rumors? We cannot understand the power of rumors and prophecies in the history by checking whether they are factually correct or not. We need to see what they reflect about the minds of people who believed them, their fear and apprehensions, their faiths and the convictions. Rumors circulated only when they resonate with the deeper fears and suspicions of the people. The rumors in the 1857 began to make sense when in the context of the policies of British persuade from the late 1820s. As you know, from that time, under the leadership of Governor General Lord William Bentinck, the British adopted policy aiming to reforming Indian society by the introducing Western education, Western ideas and Western institutions. With the cooperation of a section of the Indian society, they set up English medium school, colleges and the universities which taught Western sciences and the liberal arts. The British established law to abolish customs like sati pratha in 1829 and to permit the remarriage of Hindu widows, vidwa, on the variety of pleas like misgovernment and the refusal of recognized adoption. The British annexed not only Avadh but many other kingdoms and principalities like Jhansi and Satara. Once these territories were annexed, the British introduced their own system of administration, their own laws and their own methods of land settlement and land revenue collection. The cumulative impact of all this on the peoples of North India was profound. It seems to the people that all that they cherished and held scared, from the kings and the social religion customs to pattern of land holding and revenue payment, was being destroyed and replaced by a system that, when the people impersonal, aliens and oppression, this perception was aggravated by the activities of Christians, missionaries. In such a situation of uncertainty, rumors spread with remarkable swiftness. To explore the basis of the revolt of 1857 in some detail, let us look at Avadh. one of the major centers where the drama of 1857 unfolded. Avadh in the Revolt. Resident was the designation of an representative of the Governor General who lived in a state which was not under British control, British rule. A resident was in a Governor General who lived in Avadh in Revolt, a cherry that will develop into our mouth one day. In 1851, Governor General Lord Dalhousie described the kingdom of Avadh as a cherry that will develop into our mouth one day. 5 years later, in 1856, the kingdom was formally annexed to the British Emperor. The conquest happened in the state. The subsidiary alliance had been imposed on the Avadh in 1801. By the terms of this alliance, the Nawab had to disband his military force, allow the British to position their troops within the kingdom. The act in accordance with the advice of the British residents, who was now to be attacked to the court. Deprived to his armed forces, the Nawab became increasingly dependent to the British to maintain law and order within the kingdom. He could no longer assert the control over the rebels, chiefs and the Tokidars. In the meantime, the British became increasingly interested in acquiring the territories of Avadh. They felt that the soils there was good for producing indigo and cotton, and the region was ideally located to be developed into the principal market of Upper India. By the early 1850s, moreover, all the major areas of India had been conquered. The Marathas lands and the Doabs, the Karnatics, the Punjab and Bengal, and the takeover of Avadh in 1856 were expected to complete a process of territorial annexation and had begun. With the conquest of the Bengal almost a century earlier, the life was gone out of the body. Dalhousie annexation created disaffection in all the areas and principalities that were annexed, but now nowhere more so than in the kingdom of Avadh in the heart of North India. Here Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was dethroned and exiled to the Calcutta on the plea that the region was being misgoverned. The British government also wrongly assumed that the Wajid Ali Shah was an unpopular ruler. On the contrary, he was widely loved, and when he was left he beloved Lucknow. There were many who followed him all the way to the Kanpur, singing song of Lamat. The widespread sense of grief, the loss at the Nawab exile was recorded by many contemporary observers. One of them wrote, "The life was gone out of the body, and the body of this town has left lifeless. There was no street or market and houses which did not wail out or the cry of agony in separation of Jane Alam." One folk song bemoaned that the rule honorable English came took the country. Angrez Bahadur aaye mulk e lao linho. The emotional upheld and aggravated by immediate material losses. The removal of the Nawab led to the dissolution of the court and its culture. Thus, a whole range of peoples, musicians, dancers, poets, artisans, cooks, retailers, administrative officials, and so on, lost their livelihood. The Nawab has left. Another song mourned the plight of the ruler who had to leave his motherland. Noble and peasants all wept together, and all the world wept and wailed. Alas, the chief has bidden adieu to the century had gone abroad. Firangi Raj and the end of a world. A chain of grievance in the Avadh linked prince, Tokidar, peasants and sepoys. In different ways they came to identify Firangi Raj. With the end of their word, the breakdown of things they valued, respected to herd dear, a whole complex of emotion and issues. Tradition and loyalties work themselves out in the revolt of 1857. In Avadh, more than anywhere else, the revolt became an expression of popular resistance to an alien order. The annexation displaced not just the Nawab, it also disposed the Tokidars of the region. The countryside of Avadh was dotted with the estates and forts of Tokidars who for many generations had controlled land and power in the countryside. Before the coming to the British, Tokidars maintained armed retailers, built forts and enjoy a degree of autonomy as long as they accepted the suzerainty of the Nawab and paid the revenue of their Tokils. Some of the bigger Tokidars had as many as 12,000 foot soldiers and even the smaller ones had about 200. The British were unwilling to tolerate the power of Tokidars. Immediately after the annexation, the Tokils were disarmed and their forts destroyed. The British land revenue policy further undetermined the position and the authority of Tokidars. After the annexation, the first British revenue settlement, known as the Summary Settlement of 1856, was based on the assumption that the Tokidars were interlopers with the no permanent stakes in land. Zamindar of Avadh, 1880. They had established their hold over land through force and frauds. The summary settlement proceeded to remove the Tokidars wherever possible. Figures show that the pre-British time Tokidars had held 67% of total numbers of villages in Avadh. By the summary settlement, this number had come down to 38%. The Tokidars of the southern Avadh were the hardest hit and some lost more than half of their number of the villagers and they had previously held. British land revenue officer believed that by removing Tokidars they would be able to settle the land and the actual owners of the soil and thus reduce the level of exploitation of peasants while increasing the revenue returns for the state. But this did not happen in practice. Revenue flows from the state increased, but the burden of the demand on the peasants did not decline. Officials soon found that large areas of Avadh were actually heavily over-assessed. The increase of revenue demand in some places was from 30 to 70%. Thus, either Tokidars nor peasants had any reason to be happy with the annexation. The deposition of Tokidars meant the breakdown of entire social order. The ties of loyalty and patronage that had bound the peasants to Tokidars were disrupted. The pre-British times, the Tokidars were oppressors, but many of them also appeared to be generous father figures. They exact a variety of dues from the peasants, but were often considered in times of need. Now the British, the peasants was directly exposed in the overassessment of revenue and inflexible method of collection. There was no longer any guarantee that in times of hardship, a crop failure, the revenue demand of state would be reduced or collection postponed, or that in times of festivities in the peasants would get the loan and support that the Tokidar had early provided. In the area like Avadh, where resistance during 1857 was intense and long-lasting, the fighting was carried out by Tokidars and their peasants. Many of these Tokidars were loyal to the Nawab of Avadh, and they joined Begum Hazrat Mahal, the wife of Nawab, in Lucknow to fight the Britishers. Some even remained with her in defeat. What Tokidar taught. In the attitude of the Tokidar was best expressed by the Hanwant Singh, the Raja of Kalakangar, Kalakankar, near the Rai Bareli. During the mutiny, Hanwant Singh had given shelter to a British officer and the convoy to safety. While taking leave to the officer, Hanwant Singh told him, Sahib, your countrymen came into this country and drove out our king. You sent your officers round the district to examine the titles to the estate. At one blow you took from the lands from time immemorial had been given to my family. I submitted. Suddenly misfortune fell upon you. The people of the land rose against you. You came to me whom you had despoiled. I have saved you, but now I march to the head of my retailers to Lucknow to try and drive you from the country. The grievance of the peasants were carried over into the Sepoy lines, since a vast majority of the Sepoy were recruited from the villagers of Avadh. For decades, the Sepoys were complained of low level of pay and the difficulties of getting leave. By the 1850s, there were old reason of their discontent. The relationship of the Sepoys with their superiors, white officers, underwent a significant change in the years preceding the uprising of 1857. In the 1820s, white officers made it a point to maintain friendly relations with the Sepoys. They would take part in their leisure activities. They wrestled with them, fenced with them, and went out hawking with them. Many of them were fluent in the Hindustani and were families with the customs and the culture of the country. These officers were disciplinaries and father figures rolled into one. In 1840s, this began to change. The officers developed a sense of superiority and started treating the Sepoys as the racial inferiors, riding roughshod over their sensibilities. Abused and physical violence became common, and thus the distance between Sepoys and the officer grew. Trust was replaced by suspicion. The episode of the grazed cartilage was a classic example of this. It is also important to remember that close link existed between the Sepoys and the ruler world of North India. The large majority of Sepoys of the Bengal army were recruited from the villages of Avadh and eastern Uttar Pradesh. Many of them were Brahmins or from the upper caste. Avadh was in fact called the nursery of the Bengal army. The changes that the families of the Sepoys saw around them and the treats they received were quickly transmitted to the Sepoy lines. In turn, the fear of the Sepoys about the new cartilage, their grievance about a leaf, their grounds about the increasing misbehavior and the racial abuse on the part of their white officers were communicated back to the village. This link between the Sepoys and the ruler world had important implications in the course of the uprising. When the Sepoys defined their superiors officer and took up arms, they were joined very swiftly by their brethren in the village. Everywhere peasants poured into towns and joined the soldiers and the ordinary peoples of the towns in collective acts of rebellion. What the rebels wanted. As victors, the British recorded their own trials and tribunals as well as their heroism. They dismissed the rebels as a bunch of ungrateful and barbaric peoples. The repression of the rebels also meant silencing of their voice. A few rebels had the opportunity of recording their version of events. Moreover, most of them were Sepoys and ordinary peoples who were not literate. Thus, other than a few proclamation and istadars notifications issued by rebel leaders to propagate their ideas and persuade people to join the revolt. We do not have much that throws lights on the perspective of the rebels. Attempts to reconstruct and happen in the 1857 are thus heavily and inevitable depend on what the British wrote. While these sources reveal in the minds of officials, they tell us very little about what the rebels wanted. The vision of unity. The rebel proclamation in the 1857 repeated appealed to the all sections of the population, irrespective of their caste and creed. Many of the proclamations were issued by the Muslim princes or in their names, but even these took care to address the sentiments of the Hindus. The rebel was seen as a war in which both Hindus and Muslims had equally to lose or gain. The Ishtadars harked back to the British Hindu-Muslim past and glorified an coexistence of different communities under the Mughal Empire. The proclamation that was issued under the name of Bahadur Shah appeared to the people to join fight under the standards of the both Muhammads and the Mahavirs. It was remarkable that during the uprising, religious divisions between Hindu and Muslims were hardly noticeable, despite British attempts to create such division in Bareilly in West Uttar Pradesh. In December 1857, the British spent rupees 50,000 to incite the Hindu population against the Muslim. The attempt failed. The Azamgar Proclamation 25 August 1857. This is one of the main source of our knowledge about the rebels wanted. It is well known to all that in this age the peoples of Hindustan, both Hindus and the Mohammedans, are being ruined under the tyranny and the oppression of the infield and triarchies English. It is therefore the bounden duty of all the wealthy people of India, especially those who have any sort of connection with the Mohammedans royal families and are considered as the pastors and masters of their peoples, to stake their lives and property for the well-being of the public. Several of Hindus and Muslims chiefs who have long since quitting their homes for the preservance of their religion and have been trying their best to root out the English in India, have presents themselves to me and taken part in the rejoining India crusade. And it is more than probable that I shall very shortly receive successors from the west. Therefore, for the information of public, the peasants, Istadars, consisting of the several sections, is put in circulation, and it is the imperative duty of all to take into their carefully consideration and abide by it. Parties annexation to participate in common cause, but having no means to provide for themselves, shall receive their daily subsistence from me, and be it known to all. And the ancient works, both the Hindus and Mohammedans, and the writings of miracle workers and the calculation of the astrologers, Pandits, all agree in the asserting that the English will no have any footing in India and elsewhere. Therefore, it is incumbent on all to give up the hope of continuation of British sway. Side with me and deserve the consideration of the Badshahi and or imperial government by their individual exertion in promoting the common goods and thus attain their respective ends. Otherwise, if this golden opportunity slips away, they will have to repent for their folly. Section 1. Regarding zamindars, it is evident that the British government in making zamindari settlements have imposed exorbitant jummas revenue demand, and they have disgraced and ruined several zamindars by putting up their estates for public auction for arrived of rent, in so much in the institution of a suits by a common rights a maid servant or a slave or respectable zamindars are summoned into the court, arrested, put in gaol and disgraced in the litigations regarding zamindaris and immense values of stamps and the other unnecessary expense of civil courts are all calculated to improvise the litigations. Besides this, the coffers of the zamindars are annually taxed with the subscriptions for school, hospital, road, etc. Such extortions will have no manner of existence in the Badshahi government, but on the contrary, the Jummas will be light, the dignity and the honor of the zamindars as safe, and every zamindars will have absolute rule in his own zamindaris. Section 2 regarding merchant, it is plain that the infield and the treasuries British government have monopolized the trade of all the fine and valuable merchandise such as indigo, cloth and the other articles of shipping, leaving only the trade of trifles to the people. Besides this, the profit of the traders are taxed and postages, tolls, subscriptions for schools, etc. Notwithstand all this concession, the merchants are liable to imprisonment and disgrace at the instant or complaint of worthless men. When the Badshahi government is established, all these aforesaid fraudulent practice shall be dispensed with, and the trade of every article without exception, both by land and water, will be able to native merchants of India. It is therefore the duty of every merchant to take part in the war and aid the Badshahi government with his men and money. Section 3 regarding the public servant, it is not secret thing It is not a secret thing that under the British government, natives employed in the civil and military service have little respect, low pay and no manner of influence, and all the posts of dignity and emolument in both the departments are exclusively bestowed on Englishmen. Therefore, all the natives in the British service ought to be alive to their religion and interest, and abjuring their loyalties to the English side. The Badshahi government would obtain salaries of 200 and 300 rupees a month for the present and entitled to high post in the future. Section 4 regarding artisan, it is evident that the Europeans, by the introducing of English articles into India, have thrown the weavers, the cotton dressers, the carpenters, the blacksmiths and the shoemakers, etc. out of employ, and have engrossed their occupations, so that every description of native artisan has been reduced to beggars. But under the Badshahi government, the native artisans will exclusively be employed in the service of the king, the rajas and the rich, and this will no doubtly ensure their prosperity. Therefore, these artisans ought to renounce the English service. Section 5 regarding Pandits, Fakirs and the other learned persons. The Pandit and the Fakirs being the guardians of the Hindus and Mohammedans religions respectively, and the Europeans being enemies of both the religions, and as at present a war is raging against the English on the court of religion, the Pandits and the Fakir are bound to present themselves to me and take their shares in the holy war. What is the Sepoy thought? What is the Sepoy thought? This is one of the RGs, petitions or applications of rebel Sipahis that have survived. A century ago, the British arrived in Hindustan and gradually entertained troops in their service and became master of every state. Our forefathers have always served them, and we also entered their service. By the mercy of God and with our assistance, the British also conquered every place they liked, in which thousands of us Hindustanis men were sacrificed. But we never made any excuse or pretense nor revolted. But in the year 1857, the British issued an order that new cartridge and muskets had arrived from England were to be issued in the former, which the fats of cows and pigs were mixed, and also the attas of wheat mixed with the powdered bones ways to be eaten, and even distributed them in every regiment of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. They gave this cartilage to Soros, mounted soldiers of the 3rd Light Cavalry, and ordered them to bite. The troopers objected to it and said they would never bite them, and for it they did, their religion and faith would be destroyed. Upon the British officer parade, the men of the 3 regiments, and having prepared 400 English soldiers and other battalions of European troops, horse artillery, surrounded them. This packing 6 guns before each of the infantry regiment, loaded with guns, with grapes, and with 84 new troopers prisoners, put them into jail with irons on them. The reason that the sorrows of the cantonment were put into jail and they were frightened into the biting the new cartilage. On this account, we and all our countrymen, having united together, have fought the British for preservation of our faith. We have been compelled to make war for 2 years. The Raja's chief who are with us in faith and religion are still too, and have undergo all the sort of trouble. We have fought for 2 years in order that our faith and religion may not be populated. The religion of the Hindu and Muslims is lost. What remains in the world? Against the symbol of oppression, the proclamation completely rejected everything associated with the British rule or Firangi Raj, as they called it. They condemned the British for the annexation they had carried out, the treaties they had broken. The British, the rebel leaders said, could not be trusted. What enraged the peoples was now British land. Revenue settlement had disposed landholders, both the big and small, and the foreign commerce had driven artisans and weavers to ruin. Every aspect of British rule was attacked, and the Firangi accused for destroying a way of life that was familiar and cherished. The rebel wanted to restore that world. The proclamation expressed the widespread fear that the British were bent on destroying the caste and the religion of Hindu and Muslim and converting them to Christianity, a fear that led people to believe many of rumors that circulated at that time. People were urged to come together and fight to save their livelihood, their faith, their honors, their identity, a fight which was for the greater public good. As noticed earlier, in many places the rebellion against the British widened into an attack on all those who were seen as allies to the British or local oppressors. Often the rebels deliberated sought to humiliate the elites of a city. In the village, they burned account books and the ransacked moneylender's house. This reflected an attempt to overturn traditional hierarchies, rebel against all the oppressors. It presents a glimpse of an alternative vision, perhaps of a more egalitarian society. Such visions were not articulated in the proclamation, which sought to unify all the social groups in fight against Firangi Raj. The search for alternative power. Once the British rule had collapsed, the rebels in the place like Delhi, Lucknow, Kanpur tried to establish some kind of structure of authority and administration. This was, of course, short-lived, but the attempt showed that the rebel leadership wanted to restore the pre-British world of the 18th century. The leaders went back to the culture of court. Appointments were made to various ports. Arguments made for the collection of land revenue and the payments of the troops. Order issued to stop loot and plunder. Side by side, plans were made to fight battles against the British. Chains of commands were laid down in the armies. In all this, the rebels harked back to the 18th century. Mughals world, a world that became a symbol of all that had been lost. The administrative structure established by the rebels were primarily aimed at the meeting the demands of war. However, in the most cases, these structures could not survive the British onslaught. But in Avadh, where resistance to the British lasted longest, plans of the counter-attack were began drawn by the Lucknow court, and hierarchies of the commands were in place as late as last month of 1857 and the early part of 1858. Repression. It is clear from all the accounts that we have of 1857 that the British did not have an easy time in putting down the rebels. Before sending out the troops to reconquer North India, the British passed a series of laws to help them quell the insurgency. By a number of acts passed in the May and June 1857, not only was the whole of North India put under martial law, but military forces and even ordinary Britons were given the power to try and punish Indian suspects of rebellion. In other words, the ordinary process of law and trial were suspended, and it was put out that rebellion would have only one punishment: death. Armed and this newly enacted special law and the reinforcements brought in from Britain, the British began the task of suppressing the revolt. They, like the rebels, reorganized the symbol values of Delhi. The British thus mounted two prolonged attacks. One forces moved from Calcutta into North India and the other from the Punjab, which was largely peacefully, to reconquer Delhi. British attempt to recover Delhi began in the earnest in early June 1857, but it was only in the late September that the city was finally captured. The fighting and the losses on both sides were heavy. One reason for this was the fact that rebels from all the North India had come to Delhi to defeat the capital. In the gigantic plains too, the progress of British reconquest was slow. The forces has to reconquer the area village by village. The countryside had the peoples around were entirely hostile. As soon as they began their counter-insurgency operation, the British realized that they were not dealing with the merely mutiny but the uprising that had begun popular support. In Avadh, for example, a British officer called forcibly eliminated that 3 months of the adult male population was in rebellion. The area was brought under control only in March 1858 after the protracted fighting. British used military power on gigantic scale, but this was not only instrument they used. In large part of present-day Uttar Pradesh, where big landholders, peasants and other unity resistance, the British tried to break up the unity by promising to give back to their big landholders their estates. Rebel landholders were deposed and the royal rewards. Many landholders died fighting the British, or they escaped into Nepal, where they died by illness or starvation. Mosque of Delhi razed. Avadh, Lucknow, Secunderabad Bagh, Lucknow. Images of revolt. How do we know about the revolt, about the activities of rebels and the measures of repression that we have seen discussing? As we have seen, we have very few seconds on the rebels' point of view. There are a few rebel proclamation and notification, as also some letters that rebel leaders wrote, but historians still now have continued to discuss rebel actions primarily through accounts written by the British official accounts of cause abound. Colonial administration and military men left their version in letters and diaries, autobiographies, and the official histories. We can also gauge the official mindset, the changing British attitudes through the innumerable memos and notes, assessments of the situation, and the reports that were produced. Many of these have now been collected in a set of volumes on Minute records. These tell us about the fear, the anxieties of officials, and their perceptions of the rebels. The stories of the revolt that were published in British newspaper and magazines narrated in gory detail the violence of mutineers, and these stories inflamed public feeling and provoked demands of retribution and revenge. One important record of mutiny is the pictorial image produced by the British and Indians, painting, pencil drawings, teaching, posters, cartoons, bazaar printings. Let us look at some of them and see what they tell us. Celebrating the saviors. British pictures offer a variety of images that were meant to provoke a range of different emotions and reactions. Some of them commemorate the British heroes who saved the British and repressed the rebels. A Relief of Lucknow, painted by Thomas Jos Barker in 1859, is an example of this type. When the rebel forces besieged Lucknow, Henry Lawrence, the commissioner of Lucknow, collected the Christian population and took refuge in the heavily fortified residency. Lawrence was killed, but the residency continued to be defended under the command of Colonel Inglis. On 25 September, James Outram, the Henry Havelock, arrived, cut through the rebel forces, and reinforced the British garrison. 20 days later, Colin Campbell, who was appointed as the new commander of British forces in India, came with his force and rescued the besieged British garrison. In British accounts, and siege of Lucknow became a story of survival, heroic resistance, and ultimate triumph of British power. Barker's painting celebrates the moment of Campbell's entry. At the center of canvas at the British heroes Campbell, Outram, and Havelock, the gesture of lands of those around leads in the spectators' eyes towards the center. The heroes stand on ground that is well lit, with shadows in the foreground and the damaged residency in the foreground. The dead and injured in the foreground are testimony to suffering during the siege, while the triumphant figures of heroes in the middle ground emphasize the fact that British power and control had been re-established. The British public, such paintings were reassuming, they created a sense that the time of trouble was past and the rebel was over. The British were the victors. English women and the honor of Britain. Newspaper reports have power over public imagination. They shape feeling and attitudes to events, inflamed particularly by tales of violence against women and children. There were public demand in Britain for revenge and retribution. The British government was asked to protect the honor of innocent women and ensure the safety of helpless children. Artists express as well as shape these sentiments through their visual representation of trauma and suffering. In memoriam, figure 11.11 was painted by Joseph Noel Patton 2 years after the mutiny. You can see English women and children huddled in a circle, looking helpless and innocent, seemingly waiting for the inevitable dishonored, violence, and the death. Immemorial does not show glory, violence, it only suggests it is stirs up the specter's imagination and seeks to provoke anger and the fury. It represents the rebel as violent and brutish, even though they remain invisible in the picture. In the background you can see British rescue forces arriving the saviors. If you are supporting someone and if you are not any question about anyone who is doing a crime, you are also the part of crime, so this belongs to him. In other set of sketch and painting, we see women in different lights. They appeared heroic, defending themselves against the attack of rebels. Miss Wheeler in the figure 11.12 stands fiercely at the time of sentence. Yeah, that's I called. They are also part of this. Killing the attacking rebels. As in all such British representation, the rebels are demonized. Here the four blurry males and swords and guns are showed attacking a woman. The woman struggled to save her honor and her life. In fact, the representation as having a deeper religious connotations. It is a battle to save the honor of Christianity. The book lying on the floor is the Bible. Vengeance and retribution. As wave of anger and shock spread in the Britain, demand for retribution grew louder. Visual representation and news about the revolt created a milieu in which violent expression and vengeance were seen as both necessary and just. It was if justice demanded that the challenge to British honor and power to meet ruthlessly. Threatened by the rebellion, the British felt that they had to demonstrate their invincibility. In one such image, we see allegorical female figure of justice with a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. Her posture is aggressive. Her face expresses rage and the desire of revenge. She is trembling sepoys under her feet while a mass of Indian women with children cover with fear. There were innumerable other pictures and cartoons in the British press that sanctioned brutal repression and violent reprisal. This is wrong. The performance of terror. The urge for vengeance, the retribution was expressed in the brutal way in which the rebels was executed. They were blown from guns or hanged from the gallows. Images of their execution were widely circulated through popular journals. No time for clemency. At a time when the clamor was for vengeance, peals for moderation were ridiculed when Government General Canning declared that a gesture of leniency and a show of mercy would help in winning back the loyalty of the sepoys. He was mocked in the British press. In one of the cartoons published in pages of Punch, a British general of comic stature, Canning is shown as looming father figure with his prospective hand over head of a sepoy who still hold a unshattered sword in one hand and a dagger in other one, both dripping with blood, imaginary that recurs in a number of British pictures of the time. National imaginaries. The national movement in the 20th century drew its inspiration from the events of 1857. A whole world of nationalist imagination were woven around the revolt. It was celebrated as the first war of independence in which all sections of the peoples of India came together to fight against the imperial rule. Art and literature, as much as writing of history, have helped in keeping alive the memory of 1857. The leaders of revolt were presenting as a heroic figure leading the country into battle, renouncing the people to religious indignation against oppressive imperial rule. Heroic poems were written about the waver of the queen who, with a sword in one hand and the rein in her horse in other hand, fought for the freedom of her motherland. Rani of Jhansi was represented as masculine figure chasing the enemy, slaying British soldiers and valiantly fighting till her last. Children in many parts of India grew up reading the lines of Subhadra Kumari Chauhan. खूब लड़ी में वो तो झांसी वाली रही थी. Take a man she fought. She was the Rani of Jhansi. In popular prints, Rani Lakshmi Bai is usually portrayed in battle armors with a sword in hand and riding a horse, a symbol of determination and resistance, injustice and alien rule. These pictures indicates Manu Bai, who also called Jhansi ki Rani. Timeline. 1801 subsidiary alliance introduced by Wellesley in Avadh. 1856 why revolt of 1857 happened because of the doctrine of lapse which is introduced by Lord Dalhousie. 1856 Nawab Wajid Ali Shah deposed Avadh annexure and sent to Bengal. 1856 to 1857 summary revenue settlement introduced in Avadh by British. They take over Avadh by telling that misgovernance in Avadh. 1857 10 May mutiny start in Meerut. Sign of mutiny is roti and flower of lotus. 11 to 12 May Delhi Garrison Revolt. Bahadur Shah accepted nominal leadership. Whole sepoys are just outside the Red Fort and urging Bahadur Shah Jafar to accept him as a leader, but firstly his reaction was shocking and he declined, but soon he accepted leadership because after Britishers also declare that after Bahadur Shah Jafar, his son or any needs not become the king and hold a Red Fort and areas were under British rule. So this was also one of the part of Bahadur Shah Jafar being a part of 1857 revolt. 20 to 27 May Sipahi Mutiny Aligarh Itawa Manipur Ita.
पैसे रख ले पड़े 1000 रुपया
ना अभी तो नहीं
हैं
अभी तो नहीं है
1000 दे दो
निकाल के लाना पड़ेगा
अभी कहाँ से निकाल
कैश नहीं है निकाल के लाना पड़ेगा
500-600 भी नहीं है 1 रुपया भी नहीं है
1 रुपया भी कैश नहीं निकाल के लाना पड़ेगा 20 to 27. Okay. सिपाही मुटनी अलीगढ़ इटावा मणिपुर मैनपुरी इटा 30 May rising in Lucknow. Revolt is rising. 13 May June mutiny turned into a general revolt of peoples because they continuously transferring from one place to another place. 13 May British suffered defeat in the Battle of Chinhat. The rebels Sipais defeated the British. 25th September British forces under Havelock and Hotnam entered the residency in Lucknow. They entered in Lucknow. July, the most till survived in the last of 1857 is Avadh. July, Shahmal killed in battle. July, Shahmal killed. 1858 June, Rani Jhansi killed in battle. Why did mutiny sepoys in many places turn to Eastville rulers to provide leadership to revolt? Discuss the evidence that indicates planning the coordination on the parts of the rebels. Discuss the extent to which religious belief shaped the events of 1857. What were the measures taken to ensure unity among the rebels? What steps did the British taken to quell the uprising? Why was the revolt particularly widespread in the Avadh? What prompted the peasants, Tokidars, Zamindars to join the revolt? What did the rebels want? To what extent did the vision of different social groups differ? What do visual representation tells us about the revolt of 1815? How does historians analyze this representation? In visual representation, basically these are many drawings by Britishers, and this just gives British as a heroic representation and to crush the revolt of 1857. Examine any two sources present in the chapter, choosing one visual and one context, and they discuss how this representation and the point of view and victor and this vanquish. Map work is also very simple. So on the outline, map of India, mark Calcutta, Kolkata, Bengal province, Bombay, Maharashtra, and the Madras, Chennai, currently Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Three major centers of British power in 1857. Avadh is the main. Refer to map 1 and 2 and plot the areas where revolt was mostly widespread. How close to far of these areas from colonial cities. Read the biography of any one of the leaders of 1857, Jhansi Ki Rani, and Begum Hazrat Mahal. Jhansi Ki Rani and Begum Hazrat Mahal. Check the source used by the biographies. This includes government reports, newspaper accounts, stories in the regional languages, visual materials, anything else. Do all the sources pay the same things, or are there difference? Prepare a report on your findings. See a film made on the revolt of 1857 and write about the way it represents the revolt. How does it depict the British, the rebels, and those who remained loyal to the British, and what it say about the peasants, these dwellers, tribals, zamindars, tokidars? What kind of response does the feeling seeks to invoke? Okay, that's all for today. This is second chapter of Themes of India Part 3.